So I think the first bit which we were concerned about first, whether if we're going to extend provision of ovarian tissue freezing for non-cancer patients, either for elective freezing for individual who is worried about the age effect on her fertility or hormonal productions, or for cases of benign pathology, whether will be acceptable from the point of risk regarding the function of the ovary left behind. So I think what we've done is we've done two things. First is to improve the technique of retrieval, to instead of relying on taking the whole ovaries, taking only small part of the outer layer of one of the two ovaries, and doing it by a technique which following the microsurgical principle, which preserve all the retaining ovarian tissues. So we know from the big studies which looked at the effect of removal of the whole ovaries on the future fertility and indeed future ovarian functions, that there is no much effect of removing the whole ovary. So we even decided to go beyond that, of removing small part and doing it by a technique which will definitely save the ovaries from which the retrieval will happen. So we come with the conclusion that the technique itself will not provide any sort of harm to the existing ovarian functions, but on the opposite, it will provide a backup facilities to use the tissues for the future, either for near future or far future, depending on the expected risk. So
that sounds really exciting. So as I understand it, we have this technology which has been used in child cancer patients to put away ovarian tissue and make it available to them later if they wish to have children. And that, of course, is a tremendous service to these children. So what we are now saying is that it could be useful to other patients, other women too.
Yes.
And I guess the key group would be those who have got a condition like endometriosis and you're operating on them and you remove tissue that you would often discard. That has always, to me seemed like such a wasteful thing. You take normal, healthy ovarian tissue, which has to be removed because they have a condition like endometriosis, but then you are getting rid of it, and that tissue might have thousands of eggs that the lady might need,
Absolutely.
It's scandalous, actually.
No, absolutely. And presumably we can say now that we are on the back of a couple of decades of knowledge that provides us with the information that when a part of ovarian tissue is removed, we have two ovaries, so we don't, women have two ovaries, and they don't actually need two ovaries to guarantee the same period of time of hormonal production. So by taking part of one ovary, you're not significantly reducing the period of which they would have before menopause hits, nor the opportunity for fertility. So, in a sense, one wonders why it's taken us so long, but we know why, because one needs to get the evidence. But we're at a point where we know the woman won't be compromised, both in potential fertility options with the ovarian tissue left behind, the time at which she would hit the menopause, and yet she's got an enormous amount of opportunity to preserve both of them for the future.
That's true. And Simon, you are one of the pioneers of the IVF and egg freezing and embryo freezing. From the point of tissue freezing, you see the comparison between tissue freezing and egg freezing and how easy or how complex or difficult the tissue freezing is?
Well, one of the things that I think is extremely important coming out of 40 years in the IVF field is the onerous responsibility that one has, especially when doing cryopreservation. It doesn't matter how simple or complex it is, and this is complex. Some would like to say it's simple, but it's extremely complex. The expertise required is enormous, but it's the responsibility of looking after that tissue as well. So first of all, it's how you prepare it. Secondly, it's how do you freeze it to make sure that when it thaws out, it's maximally protected. And thirdly, how are you looking after it while it's still stored? And we will have ovarian tissue stored for possibly 30, 40 years or more if it's a child, for example. And so, yes, we appreciate it's an onerous responsibility. We undertake and accept that everything that we do must be to the highest level of that medical science, but also at the highest level of care while it's in our, what we call our tissue banks, in the liquid nitrogen, in the cryopreserved state. Because if it's well looked after, that tissue is virtually in suspended animation.
Yeah.
And when it comes out of suspended animation, it functions as if it was the same as the day it was frozen.
Yeah.
And so there are other things that you can do to be going above and beyond protection of the conventional regulations. And we're going to do that. We are going to, for example, whenever possible, we will split our samples.
Yes.
And we will give double protection while they're in our care.
That's very good. And Arri, I know that since we started the ProFaM business, you have two objectives in your mind. The first was the getting partnership with the university and the NHS, and the second is about clinical governance. So if you give us a little view about why you were very keen on both, and stressing on both here.
So as Simon mentioned, this is not a simple endeavor. It's not taking the ovarian tissue and then freezing it. There's a lot goes into it. And that clearly requires people and organizations with the right expertise and background. And what's really exciting about this particular program for me is the coming together of some great minds, great clinicians, great scientists, and great organizations. So particularly ProFaM, and we will discuss what ProFaM is designed to achieve in a moment. The Birmingham Women's and Children's Hospital are totally committed to this program, which is really very important for us. And then the University of Birmingham. The University of Birmingham brings really two key functions here. One of them is the biobank, where we will store the tissues, and as Simon mentioned, we might store the tissues for a very long time, so it needs to be a properly regulated laboratory. And the second is, of course, research. Now, we have come a long way. We know that we can get the tissues, we can store them safely, and we can thaw them and transplant them and have eggs or hormonal function from these tissues. We know that. But still there is work to be done in terms of refining some of the steps, and that requires an academic institution like the University of Birmingham putting its weight behind it to drive forward the research program. So we are really excited to be working with all the various partners. In terms of clinical governance, yes, it's absolutely crucial that the patients, the women and their partners have the confidence that we would do everything that we can to make the procedure, the whole process effective and safe. And that means us being deliberate about how we do the whole process, the process of consultation, how we guide the patient through that process, the process of surgery, the process of processing the tissues in readiness for cryopreserving it, and then of course preserving it and thawing it and transplanting. All of that would follow the strictest of guidance, guidelines and standards, which then means we need to have systems in place to ensure that those guidelines and protocols are followed every single time. And that's what the governance framework will achieve.
Perfect. So for the patients to understand who comes to ProFaM, and this is for Simon, how actually for the patient to understand how difficult it is to deliver care for patients following regulations from actually NHS, from HTA, which is the Human Tissue Authority, from the university, to provide not only safety but effectiveness, how difficult this can be achieved in a private company?
With great difficulty, because clearly, as Arri has described, you've just elucidated there, you can do it in different ways, but as far as we're concerned, there's only one way to do it. The only way to do it is to bring a group of experts together. We know, for example, in 40 years of IVF work, IVF practice today is unrecognizable to the way it was done 20, 25 years ago. And the way that's been brought about is the different tangential fields and expertise that's fed into IVF. So for example, in IVF today, genetics is a great component, but if the geneticists weren't able to move their field forward, it wouldn't have benefited IVF. We have here, working within the NHS, Birmingham University, and Christiani can't be with us today, unfortunately, but she's part of our team, an inherent part of our team, who's 20 years experienced in cryopreserving these ovarian tissues. The expertise that we've brought together is unparalleled. But more importantly, the drive and the dream we have together to create something extraordinary and very special from a patient perspective, in that they get the best, but going forwards, we will be also endeavouring to improve, which is part of the research. I think, and I believe, and I hope, that not only will we be doing the best that's absolutely possible today, but when something becomes better, we'll be leading that.
Yes.
We'll be creating the opportunities that maybe women who have tissue stored with us and will have it transplanted later, or women coming to us in 5 or 10 years' time, will all see improvements, which kind of makes me want to ask you, Yousri, do you believe, of course, that even in the retransplantation of that tissue, there's more we can do, there's more we can develop, there's more we can improve?
It will. I mean, the point, when I have started involved in that, I have a little bit of question whether the transplantations will work or not. And when we had the experience of fresh transplantations, and I've seen the results of having ovarian grafts not only functioning, but functioning well and functioning long enough, then it became obvious to me that this thing's not only functioning, but functioning very well. Of course, there is no limits of improvements, ways of improving the vascularization of the graft, which can help to prolong the lifespan of the graft when you transplant it back. But even with the current existing technology that we have, we believe that it works, but the future developments in the transplantation is massive. But can I ask, Arri, because I've been asked these questions in one of the conferences, do I recommend the OTC or the freezing for my daughter?
Yes.
And my answer was straightforward, and it was completely honest. I said, absolutely yes. I mean, when I started doing that, I have seen a lot of goodness in it, which, in my view, can change many women's future. So if I ask you, do you recommend this to your daughter?
I've got 3 daughters, and so this is not a theoretical question, it's a very relevant practical question. And I'm thinking of, I mean, clearly it would be their decision in the end,
Yes.
but in terms of what I would advise them, my recommendation and so on, I think I would ask them to very carefully consider having this procedure, for 2 reasons. One of them is that it may be that they will find themselves, in their late 30s, for example, trying to have a child, and they would then desperately wish that they had put away some ovarian tissue that would give them a better chance of having a child. No one knows exactly what is ahead of their lives, so having that ovarian tissue as an insurance, as a minimum, I think would be would give them tremendous advantage when they're trying to have a child. But of course, I also expect them to live well beyond their menopausal age, and then having the protection from the hormones that could help them have healthier bones and therefore less of a risk of fractures and so on. It's actually, from a medical point of view, it's a tremendous thing to be able to have. So yeah, I would very much hope that they would carefully consider whether this is right for them.
I've told my daughter, my youngest daughter, because she's at a perfect age to be thinking about what her father's getting up to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I said, for her 30th birthday present, this is exactly what I'm going to do for her. And that will be her 30th birthday present.
Yeah.
Because I think, for me, it's not a question of if or when or how. It's a question of, actually, what is the right age if you had freedom of choice?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And look, we absolutely know the biology tells us very clearly that the only reason the menopause hits is the pool of eggs that a woman is born with demises over time, reduces over time, eventually they don't have any left. That's the menopause.
Mm.
So actually, if there is a beginning of a decline, and we know that it is precipitative round about 35, 36, then the younger that tissue is taken,
Yes, absolutely.
and you suspend that in animation,
Yes.
Yeah.
the longer the benefit. So I would actually say, and 25 always seems a bit young because we think 25 is young, right?
Yes.
When you just come out of being a student or whatever.
Yeah.
But anywhere really from 25 onwards, and maybe even could be before 30. But for me, for my daughter, and she's got to think it through herself, but I think 30 is about the right age,
That's true.
even though potentially younger. Now, if that tissue would have lasted another 20 years, then if we've suspended it for 20 years, and then in 20 years' time she was going to hit the menopause,
Yeah.
she's got another
Yeah.
20 years to go.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
And do you think for the future this will be routine? And do you think it will be, so I remember I can go back 35 years sitting down having a coffee with Bob Edwards, who, as you know, got the Nobel Prize for IVF and was my colleague for many years, discussing the future of IVF. And you know, I'm lucky enough now to have lived through it. We didn't even think it would be as spectacular as it is today.
Yeah.
We knew it would be very different, and there will be areas of general health that IVF will touch upon. But to the extent that it is so spectacular today, I'm wondering if we were able, or others that look back on this video in 25 years' time, will ovarian tissue cryopreservation not just be the norm, but be practiced very differently?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I personally, the point is, OTC or the ovarian tissue freezing have been around for some time because of the fertility preservations. And of course, you can see how good it is in that. But this idea of hormonal preservations, which actually, in my view, is the key for the future. I mean, I know it's a fantastic project from the point of fertility and giving the opportunity for the women, in particular those having possibility of problem with the ovaries, to have fertility at the age of their choice. But the idea of delaying the menopause by 15 or 20 years' time and delaying all the risk associated with the menopause for short term and long term is something which, out of questions, is actually going to be the future. I mean, everybody asking me, I mean, I've been doing nothing but this for the last 2 years now, but I really strongly believe that if we manage to prove that this is the way forward, that this will be something people will remember us, remember the video as well, that yes, it will be routine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think if we really kind of consider what this service is offering, it's offering to delay menopause. Menopause is associated with numerous problems, from very severe symptoms, completely debilitating many women's lives when they reach menopause, to real health problems in terms of thinning of bones and fractures. And fractures in the elderly is almost like a death sentence. They don't recover so well. So this touches on both quality of life and also preventing real medical problems by using the woman's own tissue, and that's also very important. This is not something that is manufactured in a laboratory, something artificial, synthetic, that's being put in a woman. This is actually her own natural hormones, So I do think this would be as big as IVF or even bigger. This is not just giving the better chance of pregnancy later in life, should a woman need it, but also really tackling her own health and her own quality of life. I think this is very big. This is very big.